Hello and welcome to another Josh Plays 40k painting tutorial. Today we'll be painting a Hive Fleet Leviathan Hormagaunt. So let's grab some brushes and get started. So first of all, we'll be priming the model using Corax White, or if you prefer the new White Scar, as an undercoat. And then over the top of that, we will put a layer of Screaming Skull. Now I have done this with an airbrush. However, if you prefer to paint it on with a brush, that is entirely up to you. After we've done that, we're going to start blocking in that purple detail. Now I am using the new contrast paint of Leviathan Purple. Now if you've watched my original how to paint a Gene Stealer video from some months ago, you'll notice I was more traditional with using the Nagaroth Night Purple and then shading with Nun Oil over the top. However, I was very keen to try this new contrast out when it launched only a few weeks ago, because it was obviously designed to be a lot more realistic for the Leviathan paint scheme in comparison to how they used to try and make you paint with contrast, which was the Shyish purple, I believe, which I found to be rather dark. However, it has proven to be a really nice colour. It shows quite nicely. I've used it on some zoanthropes as well, and that has given a really nice texture to the purple, especially for then highlighting up from there. And it's really smooth and going onto the model. So I have been using it for these models, and it's gone on quite nicely. As you'll see, it falls onto the carapace quite well. You can get it into the recesses under there quite nicely. And obviously you can pick out the rest of the parts that will be purple as well. So there's obviously the back, obviously trying to be as neat and not to get on the Screaming Skull if possible. But then also picking out the spines on the tail and working your way down. This bit can be quite fiddly, so I'd suggest a smaller brush just to obviously get those details on without making too much of a mess. I mean, I always sort of tidy up before adding to the next stage anyway on all the models I did. It is worth just grabbing that pot of Screaming Skull and just working your way around to make sure there was no sort of big splotches of the purple. But this dries quite quickly and leaves a really nice finish. So hopefully you'll all agree and enjoy using. If not, as I say, if you prefer using the more traditional paints rather than the contrast, Nagaroth Night and a Nun Oil shade over the top of that will certainly give you a very similar look. Obviously not forgetting the plates on front of the knees as I'm doing here. Now for any sort of smaller Tyranid model, these they all have the sort of back carapace and the plates on the fronts of the legs, and obviously there's the head crests as well. And there we are, obviously just being a bit more careful as you work way round the head again, trying not to get anything on the Screaming Skull. As I say, if you do make any mistakes, just neaten up with Screaming Skull before we move on to the next stage. Once you're happy with how the carapace is looking, we'll then move on to shading the rest of the body and giving it some more of that sort of pinkish tone that you see in the box art. And for that, we are going to start off with a mix of 2 parts contrast medium to 1 part Magos Purple, which is again a contrast paint. And this, as I say, just gives the skin a nice sort of pinky tint and works in quite nicely. And then after that, you will want a mix of 1 part contrast medium to 1 part Volupus Pink. And this is just for those really recessed vent areas on the skin. So as you can see, I'm sort of working around, so any cracks between the elbows, on the knees, any sort of, let's say, the vents and cracks in the skin, anything you want to be just that little bit darker with the pink, work way around and put in that. So any sort of holes in the skin, like on the tail and on the head, anything just to sort of bring out those areas a little bit more than the raised flesh tones areas. So these stages are usually quite quick, and certainly will dry in good time. Obviously, the bigger model you paint, the more of these areas there will be. But on these smaller sort of Hormagaunts and Termagants, they are quite speedy. Once you're happy with how that initial skin tone is looking, we're going to look to get the red base coat on for this, and again we'll be using a contrast paint of Flesh Tearers Red. This just goes on really smoothly over those areas and gives a nice sort of recessed shading from the off, ready for highlighting up later. But again, obviously work your way around. You've got the feet, any claws, any little sort of small sticky out claws from the arms, as you see, and then obviously the main scything talons at the front and on the front limbs. But obviously, again, different models have different claws and features, but obviously work your way around. If you're not sure, there's usually quite a lot of artists' impressions on the box art or online, depending on what you're trying to do. Once you're happy with that red, we'll then move on to highlighting. The first highlight we're going to do is on the skin, just to obviously give it a bit more of that paleness back after we've adding the pink, just so it obviously looks a little bit brighter than like you'd see on the box art. For this, we're going to use a first off highlight of Pallid Witch Flesh, and as I say, you're just going to work your way around all the skin tones, just on the raised areas only, really, the things that would that would catch the light, and see how you go. If you're not sure, the best way to do it usually is to shine a light on the model and seeing where it would hit the most, and sort of highlighting up from there. So after you are happy with how that skin's looking, we're going to make a start on highlighting up the purple and the carapace. So the first paint we're going to want for that is Xeros Purple. And again, you're looking for a sort of feathered technique across each of the panels, sort of starting at the back of each of the panels up and just drawing sort of little lines and putting this. This is the first of 3 highlights for the purple. So it's really just to sort of lay a groundwork for creating those tones up to a nice, bright, finite, finished look. And as I say, you'll sort of go over all the little parts, so over the panels, just sort of putting a rough part over the tail. And obviously not forgetting the knee pads as well. So after that, we're going to go on to the second purple highlight, which is Gene Stealer Purple. Now this is really obviously quite a brighter colour. So again, just a feathering technique, so drawing nice concise lines if possible. Obviously it's a smaller model, so it's a little trickier to get them to be neat and long, but you obviously just want to work your way across, not going quite as into the purple as you did with the Xeros Purple, so obviously getting smaller and smaller as we go, as you can see. But just to sort of give that purple the idea that it's been well used and the carapace is a bit beaten up. It is always best when doing any sort of feathering technique to use a smaller brush as possible to ensure that you get the nice neat lines. And then the final highlight for the purple we're going to use is Slanesh Grey, and again this is just the smallest of highlights that we're going for. So over the straight lines and creases of the carapace this time. Also doing a small amount of feathering on each of the panels as before, but this is very small and is just designed to make that really sort of stand out and pop in comparison to the other two colours. Now it's always best when doing these finer edges to use the side of your brush, obviously being careful not to touch the skin, but if you use the tip on its side, then you should get a nice crisp line. Once you're happy with how that purple's looking, we'll make a start on highlighting the red. Now the first red we're going to come to is Evil Southern Scarlet, and this is just a initial of 3 highlights for this particular colour, and you're going to work your way around all of the claws and the hoofs as well of the model, and obviously making that brighten up that flesh tearer's red a little bit. You can edge highlight in terms of just getting all the corner pieces of the claws, and also add a little bit into the claw as well, just to add some variation of tones between the flesh tearer's red and this brighter red. Once you're happy with that, we'll move on to the second highlight, which will be Wild Rider Red. And this is obviously a little bit more brighter than Evil Sun Scarlet, and this is really just for catching the edges of each of those claws, and obviously just giving that a bit more of a step. Now you can go a bit further back, so as you can see I will go sort of quite close to the skin with this one, and then it will be the third highlight where it's really just catching the very tips. So then moving on to the final highlight, this is Troll Slayer Orange. Now this is just to give that red the really last pop that it needs, so that when you're looking at it you can really make it stand out. And as I say, this is just for catching the very tips of each of those areas, as you can see I'm doing here. And the very, and obviously on the scything talons at the front, just the very front parts of the claws. Once you're happy with all those highlights, we can start moving on to a couple of the smaller details. So starting off with the teeth. Now some of the models have open mouths, some of them are closed like this one. But for the teeth and the mouth area, you'll be looking at Skeleton Horde contrast. It gives a nice brown effect, and certainly for teeth it then highlights over the top already like most contrasts do, to obviously make the teeth stand out a little bit more to the recesses. But this does go in quite nicely for all of those particular models. And then once you're happy with that, it's time to give the eyes their ominous orange glow. For that, we're going to use iodine yellow, and just literally take a small amount on your brush, pop it in the eye socket, and sort of the very edges of that around, just to give it that nice sort of glow, and that will fit in there nicely. And then after that, we have our finished Hormagaunt. So thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions at all, please pop them in the comments below. I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have or any feedback. But otherwise, I can only ask that you please like and subscribe the video, and we'll see you soon. Thank you. Bye.